Canada is suddenly facing a question that many people once thought was almost impossible. Could one of its richest and most important provinces actually try to leave the country? In the oil-rich western province of Alberta, separatists have now gathered nearly 302,000 signatures in support of holding a referendum on independence, far above the roughly 178,000 needed for consideration. And while the road to actual separation remains extremely complicated, the political shockwaves are already spreading across the country. Because this is not just about one referendum. It is about a growing feeling among many Albertans that their province is economically exploited, politically ignored, and culturally disconnected from the rest of Canada. The movement's leaders say Ottawa is trying to control Alberta while weakening the very oil and gas industry that made the province wealthy in the first place. And now, for the first time in decades, those frustrations are moving beyond angry political debates and turning into a real separatist push. The timing makes this even more explosive. Canada is already dealing with economic pressure, political polarization, rising regional tensions, and growing debates over energy and climate policy. And now, suddenly, one of its economic engines is openly questioning whether it should remain part of the country at all, even if separation never actually happens. The fact that the question is now being taken seriously tells you something important. The political unity of Canada no longer feels as stable as it once did. To understand why this movement has gained momentum, you have to understand Alberta itself. Home to roughly 5 million people, Alberta is one of Canada's wealthiest provinces, largely because of its massive oil and natural gas reserves. For decades, Alberta's energy sector has generated enormous revenues, jobs, and exports that have helped support the wider Canadian economy. But many Albertans believe they are not receiving fair treatment in return. There is a strong perception inside the province that political decisions are made mainly in Ottawa by leaders who neither understand Alberta nor share its priorities. This frustration became even stronger as environmental regulations and climate policies tightened over recent years. Many Albertans see these policies as direct attacks on their livelihoods. Pipeline delays, restrictions on fossil fuel development, and federal climate targets have all become symbols of what separatists describe as interference from distant politicians and bureaucrats. For many people in Alberta, this is not just an economic issue, it has become an identity issue. Separatist leaders openly argue that Alberta's conservative culture is fundamentally different from the more liberal politics dominating much of Eastern Canada. And that feeling of political alienation has been growing steadily for years. The rise of this separatist push also reflects a broader global trend where regional identities are becoming stronger in many countries. Across the world, economic frustration and political polarization are driving movements that question national unity itself. Alberta's movement is not identical to others, but there are similarities with places like Quebec, Scotland, or Catalonia. In each case, supporters argue that their region contributes heavily to the national economy while lacking sufficient political control over its own future. But Alberta's case is unique because energy sits at the center of everything. Oil is not simply one industry among many. It is deeply tied to the province's identity, economy, and political culture. That is why debates over climate policy become so emotionally charged there. Many Albertans believe that federal environmental policies are effectively trying to phase out the economic foundation of the province itself. Separatist leaders have used this argument very effectively, presenting independence not as a radical dream, but as a form of self-defense. They argue Alberta could manage its own energy resources more aggressively, lower taxes, build new export routes, and pursue closer economic ties with the United States without interference from Ottawa. Still, despite the growing noise around independence, the path toward actual separation remains incredibly difficult. First, the petition signatures still need to be verified by election authorities. Legal challenges are also mounting. Several Indigenous First Nations groups have already filed court actions arguing that Alberta cannot simply separate because treaty agreements were made with Canada itself, not with an independent Alberta. This introduces a massive constitutional issue that could take years to resolve. Even if a referendum happens, polls currently suggest only around 30% of Albertans support outright independence. That is significant, but still far from a majority. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith has also said she personally does not support leaving Canada, even though she has promised to allow a vote if legal requirements are met. And then comes the biggest challenge of all: what happens after a yes vote? Separation would trigger years of negotiations over borders, trade, military arrangements, Indigenous rights, debt sharing, currency, and international recognition. Canada's constitution does not provide a simple exit mechanism for provinces. So even if Albertans voted in favor of independence, the process afterward could become legally and politically chaotic. That uncertainty is one reason why many voters remain hesitant. The movement has also become controversial because of growing attention from the United States. Comments from figures linked to the administration of Donald Trump have intensified fears among critics that Alberta separatism could weaken Canada strategically and economically. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent recently described Alberta as a natural partner for the United States because of its energy resources. For separatists, comments like these feel validating, but for opponents, they are deeply alarming. Critics argue that outside encouragement from Washington risks turning Alberta's frustrations into a geopolitical issue. Some fear an independent Alberta could become economically dependent on the United States, especially since most of its oil exports already flow south. Others warn that foreign political support gives separatist leaders greater legitimacy and momentum. Former Alberta Deputy Premier Thomas Lukaszuk even described the movement as a form of betrayal against Canadian unity. The debate has therefore evolved beyond simple provincial politics. It is now tied to larger concerns about sovereignty, foreign influence, and Canada's long-term cohesion as a country, and that makes the issue far more sensitive politically. In the end, Alberta's separatist movement reflects something much deeper than a temporary political dispute. It exposes the growing regional fractures inside modern democracies, where economic grievances, cultural identity, and political polarization are combining in powerful ways. Alberta is not simply demanding more local control, it is questioning the very structure of the Canadian Federation itself. Whether the referendum actually happens or not, the movement has already changed the political conversation in Canada. It has forced federal leaders to confront the reality that many Albertans feel disconnected from the national project. It has also highlighted the difficult balancing act facing countries trying to transition toward climate policies while still relying heavily on fossil fuel economies. And perhaps most importantly, it shows how quickly political frustration can evolve into separatist sentiment when people begin to believe their voices are no longer being heard. Canada still remains one of the world's most stable democracies, but stability should never be confused with permanence. Because once serious conversations about separation begin entering mainstream politics, they rarely disappear completely. Even if Alberta stays inside Canada, the forces driving this movement, economic anger, political distrust, regional identity, and cultural division, are likely to remain part of Canadian politics for many years to come.